All right, well, it is the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you to this webinar about the 9 money mistakes that doctors make. I'm Dr. Vicki Rackner, your host. I call on my experience as a practicing surgeon, clinical faculty at the University of Washington School of Medicine, and serial entrepreneur to help doctors thrive. Because I know that doctors need a strong financial foundation. For the past decade, I've been helping financial services professionals engage and serve doctor clients. And it's just a real honor and privilege to, work with the thousands of financial advisors in this community and see them successfully engage doctors. And here is why. Basically, doctors need your help. So what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes talking about why doctors need your help and what their overall financial situation is. And then I'd like to share with you the results of my interviews with literally hundreds of doctors, in which I got curious about, what separates the thriving doctors from the struggling doctors. Okay, so here's the deal. About half of doctors are behind in retirement planning. Every year, the AMA Insurance Agency does a survey, and year after year, the results are the same. And the fact that doctors have this awareness, but yet don't do anything to sort of change the overall look is very telling. Now, we also know that only half of doctors are working with professional financial advisors. And not surprisingly, the doctors who work with financial advisors are more likely to be on track for retirement. That makes sense, right? You may also be aware that there's a whole sort of financial do-it-yourself movement within the medical community. It's sort of headed by a guy called the White Coat Investor. He's an ER doc, and when he was a resident, he sort of said he got tired of being ripped off. And so he started this movement to help doctors understand that they could take care of their own money. I actually personally think that this actually does more harm than good. We as physicians know that we shouldn't treat ourselves. We shouldn't prescribe ourselves antibiotics. And why? Why don't we treat people that we love? It's because emotion clouds judgment. And so while doctors have the intellectual prowess to manage their own money, I personally believe that every doctor should be working with a professional financial advisor. And I tell doctors in my community that much also. So 2019 was really a year of change for doctors. It was a year of change for everyone, of course. Most of our behaviors, staying at home, sheltering in place, was an attempt to make sure that the demand for healthcare resources did not exceed the supply. And every time I operated on a patient, we had a ventilator in the operating room, right? Well, ventilators were in short supply, so many hospitals decided that they were going to take all of their resources and really devote it to the treatment of COVID patients. What that meant was that many elective cases were put on hold. Many patients were afraid to go and see the doctor. So doctors took a pretty big financial hit. Now, I'm not trying to ignore the reality that there are restaurateurs, there are small business owners who have lost everything. And I'm not trying to equate the suffering of doctors to that kind of suffering. But what I will tell you is that most people in business have the business skills to weather a financial storm, right? No doctor ever imagined that their income might be decreased by literally 80 to 90%, as it was for a lot of specialists. Many employed physicians were asked to take pay cuts. Many physicians were furloughed. And I will just say that in our wildest dreams, we never saw any of this happening. And many physicians, unfortunately, didn't have those emergency funds. I mean, they struggled financially. Unfortunately, there were bankruptcies. I'm a fellow of the American College of Surgeons, and they were hosting some pretty wild webinars like financial survival strategies for the COVID world. So this has all been pretty shocking. Every year, Medscape does a survey of physician compensation. You can go and sign up and get a free Medscape survey. So what they found is that most doctors took a financial hit. I mean, there were some doctors who did very, very well in 2020, but most took a hit. And this year they asked a question, you know, how long is it going to be until you're back to pre-COVID income levels? About 40% said a year, 40% said 2 to 3 years, 10% said 2 to 5 years, and 10% said never. So doctors are catching up right now. Money management does not feel as much like a do-it-yourself job as it did in the pre-COVID era. So more and more doctors are reaching out to people like you. There was a second survey that was released just a few weeks ago about burnout. You may or may not be aware that there's an epidemic of burnout among physicians. So this year, the survey found that about 42% of doctors reported burnout in 2020. That's the same as in 2019. About 80% of those doctors had burnout that predated COVID, and about 20% sort of felt like all of the stresses associated with COVID really sent them over the edge. Then they asked a very interesting question. They asked, what would you need in order to turn around this burnout picture? And the most frequent answer was improve finances. So you see that there's sort of a chicken and egg thing going on here, right? Doctors have taken a financial hit. They have financial stresses. They're having a hard time imagining recovery. Yet, with this burnout, with the response to all of the stresses associated with COVID, they sort of feel like they need more money in order to turn things around. So there is a way of breaking the cycle. My book, The 9 Money Mistakes That Doctors Make, is a very popular book among physicians right now. They recognize that this is not a time to be making mistakes. They've got to do things right. In addition, the ideas that I'm going to be presenting to you today are ideas that I have been presenting to groups of physicians. So I will talk with you about ways that you might want to include this kind of information as you reach out for doctors. But for right now, how about if you just kind of focus on the delivery that I make, and then we can talk about how you might be able to use some of this content to engage more doctors. So the basis of these 2 books actually kind of started by accident. I was on vacation with my family. I made a commitment to delivering weekly blog posts. And so one day I just whipped off a little blog post called The Myth of the Rich Doctor. I'd run into yet another person who was in healthcare herself. She was a nurse, but she just assumed that all doctors are rich. And I think it's kind of shocking to people when they discover that while doctors are high income earners, they don't always do a great job translating their high earnings into wealth. So by the time I got back from vacation, this thing had gone viral. I got invitations to speak about it. And I thought, well, if this is getting this kind of interest, let me expand this into a book. And after the release of the book, I was literally all over the country giving the talk about the myth of the rich doctor. Some medical associations even gave ongoing continuing medical education credit for this particular presentation. So what I did in this book is I used a medical metaphor. I said, what if money were your patient? Let's go through and assess the health of your money. So doctors can get it, right? I mean, you think about money in a much different way than doctors do. Doctors know how to take care of patients. So I think that this explains why this book did so well. But I wanted to go one step further. I wanted to go back and reflect on the hundreds of interviews I've done with doctors in their relationship with money and identify what are thriving doctors doing that struggling doctors are not. And the big aha moment, gets back to something that Warren Buffett says. He says the 2 laws of building wealth. Law number 1, don't lose money. Law number 2, don't forget law number 1. So I outlined in this book the 9 money mistakes that can literally cost doctors millions. So in a very high level overview, here they are. So mistake number 1 is the failure to understand the biology of behavior. So I've got a whole nother talk about how to manage the hidden hazards that can sink financial futures. Now, we all know about the risks of icebergs. There are certain things above the surface that you can see, and if you're the Titanic, you can try to navigate around. But the real risk, the real danger, is what sits below the surface, the things that you cannot see. Well, using that iceberg metaphor, I would argue that what you do is you navigate the finances that you can see. So you talk about how money is earned and saved and invested. The things below the surface, though, are the places where most of the errors happen. So what actually drives money choices? Why is it that doctors who are smart people who know that one day they'll retire don't actually do the things that would help them translate their high net worth into wealth? So, of course, below the surface, we're really talking about behavioral finance. And I think that this is one of the most fascinating things that I have ever explored. I will tell you that as a doctor, what we know is that patients, even patients who face life-threatening medical emergencies, will often not do the things that they know that they should do in order to turn their health picture around. In a very similar way, there are many things that doctors know that they should do to optimize their financial health that they are just not doing. A lot of times they look at themselves with judgment and shame. Oh, I lost $100,000 in that dumb doctor deal. I never should have gotten into that. Or why didn't I start saving and investing? And sometimes that shame keeps them from moving forward. So what I like to do when I'm talking to doctors, and I encourage you to do this too, is to substitute insights and understanding with what they're experiencing as judgment and shame. So now that we understand a little more about how the brain works, we know that people are either born spenders or born savers. There actually is a place in the brain called the nucleus accumbens that seems to be the biologic set point about whether somebody is going to experience the joy of spending or the horror of not having enough money. So it is literally true. There are born spenders and born savers. There's a biologic propensity to assume risk. Some people love risk. Other people want to be completely safe. So part of this is our biology. Now, I was delivering this talk at a big medical meeting, and the very next doctor on the platform was a psychiatrist from Harvard who was talking about burnout. And he was talking about the fact that toxic stress is toxic to the brain. And the most sensitive area, he said, was the nucleus accumbens. And that was a big aha moment for me. That was the very part of the brain that impacts this, this spending, saving stress point. And I thought about how I, who am wired like a spender, will often engage in retail therapy to manage stress. And I do wonder how many people go onto Amazon during this time of stress and just engage in retail therapy. Well, there's a reason, and now you can help doctors understand the reason. I will also tell you that I know that you want to reach out to doctors, right? You want to help them, overcome this biology. And I will tell you that you might want to reach them with logic and numbers. But you know what? They're smart people. They know they should be planning for retirement, right? But what I want you to keep in mind is that emotion drives motion. So it's not the thinking brain that's going to inspire doctors to actually take action. It's the feeling brain. So emotion drives motion. The best way to speak to the emotional brain is by telling stories and creating pictures, word pictures. So telling the stories of other doctors who had sort of a financial makeover is really compelling. Telling the stories of other doctors who've lost money in dumb doctor deals and now they're doing things different. This is the kind of thing that will really inspire a doctor to take action. Now, I've got something else that I'd like to share with you. This isn't in the book, but this may help you as you reach out and talk to doctors. So there was a time when I operated on a patient with multiple personality disorder. Well, that's what they called it back then. And I asked her to describe her experience of being in the world. And she talked about like a conference table in her brain, and all of these people were, would sit around the conference table. And then there was one chair that was next to sort of the window out into the world. And the person who was in that chair was the person with whom the world connected. And as I listened to her, I could see different parts of myself. Like I acted differently as a mother and as a wife and as a friend and as a doctor. So like I saw different committee members among myself. The only difference between myself and my patient was that all of these selves are integrated. Okay, well, imagine that we have this committee in our brain that helps manage our money, and I call it the money committee. And what I'd like to share with you are the possible committee members. And then what I like to do with doctors is help them understand which committee member is making the money choices in any given moment. Okay, so the ideal member of the money committee to be making the money decisions is the CEO. Think of the CEO like the CEO of any big organization. This is the person who sets the vision, who identifies the values, and lays out the principles that will guide how money is spent. So, if it's time to buy, a new house or a new car, ideally, the vision and values and principles will help determine, what kind of car is purchased and when it's purchased. So If you think about your clients who really do best, they probably have the discipline to have the CEO as the member of the money committee who gets the ultimate decision about how money is earned, spent, and invested. All right, another member of the money committee is the bookkeeper. So this is the person who keeps track of how much money is going in and how much is going out. Now, for many doctors, the bookkeeper is on vacation. I mean, if you ask them, what are your monthly household expenses, quite often they'll be off by an order of magnitude. Doctors in private practice will often not have a very good finger on the pulse of what their true revenue is, what their expenses are. Now, when doctors manage patients in the intensive care unit, they know how much fluid is going into the patient and how much fluid is coming out. And they really keep track of that on a very, very careful basis. And so if you're talking with a doctor about how money goes in and out, you might want to just ask them, when you're dealing with a critically ill patient, do you know how fluids go in and out of your patient's body? And they say, but of course. And then you might suggest, well, wouldn't that information be helpful to you as you think about your finances? So sort of waking up the bookkeeper within and raising awareness that this is important. Now, there are other interesting things that you might notice. You might tell the doctor that they just don't open their fidelity statements anymore because they're too scared to see what's on the inside. So supporting doctors who are anxious as they go through the experience of getting to their financial truth is something that you can help them do. Another member of the money committee is the child within. So the child wants what he wants, when he wants it, and that's usually now. The reality is that doctors have to give up a whole lot in order to get to the position of treating patients. And after years and years and years of deprivation, they decide, you know what, I deserve it. Or maybe the husband or wife, the partner of the doctor, thinks, I never see my partner, and so I'm just gonna help myself to whatever it is that I want. Or many doctors want to buy their way out of guilt for not being there for their kids. So there are a whole bunch of impulse purchases. And, in general, these impulse purchases can make them feel better in the moment. Again, the nucleus accumbens kind of get stimulated and they feel better right now. But generally, that pleasure is very transitory. It goes away very quickly. So the little indulgences can also add up. I was watching a documentary about Warren Buffett, and they were following him in his car, and he went through the McDonald's drive-through. And he said, sometimes I get the bigger breakfast, but if the stock market isn't doing very well, I order the less expensive breakfast. And I was thinking to myself, how interesting, Warren Buffett could afford to, probably purchase McDonald's, but he pays attention to all of the expenses. And sometimes the indulgences of the child within, it's only $100 here, $300 there, but these things really do add up. So of course you want doctors to be able to spend without guilt, right? And so as you work with them and you work with their bookkeeper within, you want to make a plan for, treating the child within. Another member of the money committee is security. And this is huge with doctors. So security is always scanning the horizon, looking out for danger. Okay, So, according to the US Department of Labor Statistics, 10 out of the 10 top earners in the US call themselves doctor. Now, if you had a financial scam, whom would you target? Doctors, right? Many doctors, myself included, have been the victim of financial predators. And so what we do is we are very careful with whom we speak. We would much rather get financial advice from a doctor that we trust to clinically treat our patients than from somebody that they do not know. So if you want to work with doctors, your end game is to become the go-to guy or go-to gal among targeted groups of doctors. So there's at least one doctor, one insider doctor, who's saying, this person did a good job for me. You can trust this person. So, I'm often asked things like, how do I get past the gatekeeper? How do I really get a doctor's attention? And really they're asking is, how do I get past security? Like, how do I get a slice of the doctor's attention pie? And I think that the best way to do this is give gifts, give things of value. If you like the 9 Money Mistakes book, you can, buy a whole bunch from me at my author's cost and then just give it as a gift. Deliver value, contribute. That's the best way to get around security. The next member of the money committee is the time traveler. So any choice that we make, we are making in the present moment, right? But we do that because we've got our eye not just on the present moment, but on the future too. So there's 2 ways that time travelers work. They can, sort of live in the past, or they can live in the future. So there are a lot of doctors who have financial PTSD. Something bad has happened to them in the past, and now in the present moment, it's as if the past isn't over. You might be of the age where you actually had clients who lived through the Great Depression. They might have millions in assets, but they have this eternal fear of being homeless because they are reliving the trauma of the Great Depression. If somebody has had a childhood trauma, let's say they lost a house in foreclosure, they might have a fear of being homeless. I recently was talking with a couple, and I know what they've got. The wife is just a huge cook. She wanted to design a chef's kitchen. Listen, they could afford it. But the husband just could not part with his money. Like, it caused him pain to think about spending money. And sure enough, he had some of this childhood trauma. And if you're working with somebody who seems to be making irrational choices about money, like their behaviors aren't aligned with their financial truth, you might want to explore their childhood. You might say something like, well, tell me, what lessons did your parents teach you about money? What's your earliest memory of money? And quite often you will find sort of this trigger for their current behavior. And, once you actually uncover, what this trigger is, you can, with compassion, say to them, isn't it great that the past is over? That now you're an adult with credit cards and car keys, and, you're not a vulnerable child anymore. You really do have control over your destiny. There are some people who spend all of their time thinking about the future. Now, you want people to think about the future in a healthy, functional way, right? Doctors need to know that one day they're going to want to retire, but there can be some dysfunction here. They can see a really, really scary future. So ideally, you want to help doctors live in the moment, making their financial choices that are aligned with this moment with an eye to the future. I personally think that this behavioral finance piece is the place that you can make transformations with clients. Okay, mistake number 2 is the failure to harness the power of leverage. And I specifically talk with doctors about the power of compound interest. You know, Albert Einstein says compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't, pay it. Okay, let's think about doctors for a moment. It requires a protracted training. So let's say there's 2 buddies that start college at the same time. They're 18, and one is a computer science major, the other is a chemistry major with an eye to going to medical school. Okay, the computer science major at 21 goes to work for Microsoft, maybe is earning, $100,000 and has a retirement plan. His buddy spends the next 4 years going to medical school, and the average medical school debt is a couple $100,000 these days. Then goes to 3 to 5 years of residency training where the income is livable, maybe it's $50,000 a year. And then finally, for me, it was 9 years. Finally, they go on to earn their dollars. And so they've already lost at least a decade. For some doctors, it's more. And when you look at the power of compound interest, that makes a huge difference. So doctors are already starting out in retirement planning behind the 8 ball because they've lost the time value of money, right? And in addition, since they've had this life of deprivation, it kind of feels like, wow, I'm here now, I'm set. And so, they listen to the realtors who tell them how they can afford their starter mansion with these special doctor mortgages. There's messages all around, you've earned it, you deserve it. And so a lot of doctors just put off retirement planning, period. They figure they've got lots of years to catch up. And for many doctors, 2020 was a real shock because they had left, setting aside savings for their emergency fund for later. And this was a real problem. But there's other kinds of leverage that doctors can take advantage of. If you've got a doctor who's interested in real estate investing, they might know the power of other people's money. The smart doctors can harness and leverage the wisdom of others like you. So instead of worrying about, which stocks they should buy, and yes, there are doctors who are trying to decide what stocks to invest in, if they would leverage your expertise, they could then devote themselves to what they really, really do best. They can leverage the efforts of others. Doctors make money by exchanging their time for money, right? I used to get paid based on the number of operations that I did. And there are only so many hours in the day, but they can leverage other people. They can hire other physicians. They can hire PAs or nurse practitioners so that there's not a cap on how much they can earn. So bringing this message of leverage in all sorts of different ways really can help doctors. Next, doctors fail to manage taxes strategically. So I have the privilege of, being invited to deliver talks at financial meetings. And I remember being in the audience once, and there was somebody at the front of the room, and he said, "Tell me, what is your biggest expense?" And the financial advisor started shouting, my house, my wife, my vacations, my toys. And he said, if you really think about it, your biggest lifetime expense are taxes. And that was a big wow moment for me. I'd never really thought about that before. And that inspired me to sort of draw this cartoon. So I remember listening to a really, really smart guy. He was a tax, he had gone to law school. So he said to me, you know, a lot of people think about taxes as punitives, but really the tax law is a form of social engineering, right? It provides financial incentives for Americans to engage in the activity that's going to help our nation build wealth, you know, creating housing, creating jobs, you know, giving to charitable organizations. He said that same law can help individuals build wealth too. So he recommended that doctors engage in sort of a tax martial arts to go with the momentum of the tax code in order to help themselves build wealth. So we're not talking about doing anything illegal or immoral, you know, taking your money offshore. But there are a whole lot of ways that doctors can legally and ethically take advantage of the new tax laws in order to significantly reduce the amount of taxes that they pay. Now, remember, we're dealing with doctors who are trying to figure out how to catch up from the losses in 2020. I think that, you know, harvesting tax savings is a no-brainer. I mean, this is something that they should be doing. Now, what they might not be aware of is that most CPAs are tax historians, right? You know, here's what I did this year. The CPA plugs things in and says, okay, well, here's how much you owe in taxes. But a true tax strategist can work wonders. One of my clients told me the story about how he helped a client who was an orthopedic surgeon cut his tax bill by over $900,000 in a single year. So ideally, you've got a true tax strategist who's a member of your dream team so that you can help doctors harvest these kinds of tax savings. I just will tell you that, you know, if you take a look at any one thing that a doctor thinks that he or she knows about wealth building, it will fall in one of these slices of the pie. There are things that doctors know they know, and there are things that doctors know they don't know. So this is the safe area, right? But then there are things that they don't know, Like they could harvest significant tax savings. They could easily cut their taxes by tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars when working with the right person. There are things doctors know they know, but they are wrong, and know they know, but ignore. And one of the things that separates doctors as clients from your business-minded clients is that this unsafe area tends to be a little bigger. So as you work with doctors, you might want to just check in with them and find out, you know, what it is that they believe to be true. All right, the next mistake is the failure to negotiate. So, you know, virtually all doctors sign employment contracts. And by the way, sort of the big musical chairs time is coming up. Most doctors begin new jobs around July 1st. And the reason is that medical school starts July 1st. So everyone advances a level on July 1st. And because most people sign annual contracts, you know, the beginning date of most contracts is in July sometime. All right. Well, doctors tend to be collaborative people. They want to be perceived as team players. And so if they're offered a job, generally they say yes. Now, I remember reading Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. So she was talking about how she came to be the COO of Microsoft. She said that she had multiple conversations with Mark Zuckerberg. It looked like it was going to be a fit. And then Mark Zuckerberg made her an offer, and she said that, her impulse was just to accept. But she went home and spoke with her husband, who unfortunately has passed away, and he said, no, you don't understand. That offer is just the starting point of the conversation. He's expecting you to come back with the counter offer, which she did. And so she was able to negotiate. But it really struck me that if the COO of Microsoft is sort of missing this link, that, she should be negotiating. That doesn't bode well for physicians. And in fact, most physicians have a very hard time negotiating. But this can mean the difference of literally millions of dollars in lifetime income. Let's say that we've got a fellowship trained orthopedic surgeon who's 35 years old. The mean starting salary is about $500,000. What if this person just increased their starting salary by 10% and then worked for 30 years from 35 to 65? Well, that difference in starting income translates into literally millions of dollars difference in income. So doctors really pay the price for a failure to negotiate. And what's negotiable? Well, everything is negotiable, right? The income that they generate is negotiable. Their salary, interest rates are negotiable. I mean, everything is negotiable. So if you can help open doctors' eyes to this reality, you can make a huge financial difference. Now, I will tell you that I once spoke with a very successful financial advisor who was towards the end of his career. So I'm always going out and asking successful people, like, what's your secret, right? And he said, well, here's how I got started. Back then, you could buy lists of the names of graduating residents and fellows, and I just sent them a letter saying, hey, congratulations on completing your training. You're probably about to sign a contract, but if you'd like, we would be happy to review the contract on a complimentary basis and share with you some suggestions. For a small fee, we will negotiate your contract for you for a small fee. And he said that virtually everyone who came to him and took him up on that offer went on to become his client. So you can imagine, he was 70 at the time. After 50 years, he was making a significant income. So this is really important. Remind doctors that they can negotiate. Next is the failure to optimize earning potential. All right, so, with many, many doctors, life as they knew it is over. Some doctors are, getting back to their elective cases. Some doctors are integrating telemedicine, but doctors are really looking for ways to pivot and really think about new ways of generating income. So, one of the most popular talks that I give are the 10 ways that I, over the past 2 decades, have replaced my own surgeon's income with entrepreneurial ventures. Doctors are very interested in this. They're interested in ways that they can develop passive revenue. They're interested in entrepreneurial ventures. And so, talking with doctors is definitely a great way of catching their attention. If you can help them figure out how to really optimize their earning potential. And let me just mention that if you're working with doctors in private practice, a really, really easy intervention is to suggest that they outsource their billing. So, doctors make money by seeing patients. They identify a diagnostic and procedure code, send those forms off to the insurance company. And in general, about 30% of those claims are rejected. Now, a lot of busy doctors who do in-house billing will just, maybe get to them sometime if they have time. One doctor opened up his drawer to reveal all of these rejected insurance claims. He called this his Porsche drawer. He said he knew if he just followed up on these claims, he could buy a Porsche. But because things are busy, because things are hectic, oftentimes these claims just don't get collected. Then the CPA says, well, great, no problem. We just can write it off as bad debt. You need the deduction anyway. Well, if a doctor is really stressing about revenue and they outsource their billing, they could potentially, increase cash flow by 15, 20% within 60 days. So this is really low-hanging fruit. So if you want to help figure out where to find money to accelerate retirement planning, this is an easy way to do it. Okay, next mistake is the failure to plan for financial menopause and beyond. So menopause is when women make a transition from their productive to non-productive years. And similarly, when doctors retire, they make this transition too. But I'll tell you, doctors are sort of wired for service. They might have fantasies about being on the golf course all day, every day, but that gets pretty old pretty fast. So helping doctors really plan wisely for retirement and be realistic about what they can do in order to meet this need for service. If you've got somebody who has accumulated wealth, some legacy building, maybe they want to build a hospital in Africa or build wells. Help them figure out how to continue to serve. Next mistake is to fail to protect yourself from bad people. So I often felt like there was just a target on my back saying, sue me. So, we know that about 6 out of 10 doctors will be sued for medical negligence. I spent some time being an expert in these medical malpractice lawsuits. I think this is a great activity for doctors who are interested in generating more revenue. But here's the deal. Doctors can be sued for many, many more things other than direct patient care. If a doctor has a teenager who's in a car accident, well, you know what? If some personal injury lawyer sees that the mother or father is a doctor and there are assets that are recoverable, chances are pretty good that the doctor is going to get sued. I will often tell this story about a 70-year-old dermatologist. He had done a great job at accumulating wealth, and he was still practicing because he just loved practicing medicine. So one day he sent his office manager out to get sandwiches for the team. Unfortunately, she was in a car accident. A teenager was killed. Everyone was insured, right? But the lawyer retained by the family of this teenager found out that this woman was out getting sandwiches for the medical team, sued the doctor, and the doctor lost everything. So for doctors, I'm not really worried about the medical malpractice lawsuits. I mean, they're a pain, but doctors are going to prevail. There are not very many awards that will require a doctor to pay out of pocket. What I'm worried about are these other things, these slip and falls at a Christmas party kind of thing. You know, the things that have nothing to do with the practice of medicine. And the best thing that doctors can do to protect themselves is do the kind of asset protection that you help them with. So I would tell stories about this and really encourage doctors to put a safety net around their assets and do it in a smart way so that they take that target off of their back. And they can do very, very simple things. Like, for example, if they took a small bank loan against equipment that they own or maybe their accounts receivables, then the bank would be the first creditor in line in the event of a judgment against them. I mean, just little things like that will make them less attractive and hopefully will make the personal injury lawyer think 2 or 3 times before naming the doctor in a lawsuit. Next is the failure to plan for untimely death or improbable disasters. Unfortunately, there are healthcare professionals who died treating COVID patients. They died because of suicide. There are some COVID long haulers among healthcare professionals. So doctors understand in a visceral way that these things that quite honestly they felt invulnerable to can and do happen. So this is really a great time to be talking with doctors and making sure that they have adequate levels of coverage for life, for disability. You know, do they have an umbrella policy for their homeowners insurance? You know, do they have adequate protection for activity on social media? Do they have HIPAA violation protection? I mean, nobody likes spending money on insurance. It's not a sexy way to spend money, but boy, if you need it, you are always happy that they are there. And the last mistake that most doctors, myself, are included in is becoming the victim of dumb doctor deals. You know, so, you know, like I can see it in my mind's eye, you know, some surgeons were sitting around the surgeon's lounge between cases, and one doctor was talking about this great investment. He had invested in a dry cleaner, and he was making like 200% returns on his investments. And suddenly, like, all the doctors wanted to go in on dry cleaners or car washes or barbecue joints. And the thing is that nobody had done their due diligence. You know, all they really needed for evidence that this was a great deal was a doctor they trusted say, here's what I'm doing. So, you know, as I watched this, it was like watching lemmings going off the cliff. So, you know, you can really, really help doctors by suggesting that they look at the numbers before they make investments. You know, sometimes they're going to have a real strong emotional pull. You know, their kids might want yet another round of seed money for this no-fail business, or they want to buy, you know, this house someplace where it makes absolutely no sense. So they're going to make an emotional choice. But if you can help them sort of bring logic and reason in before they invest their hard-earned dollars, you will be serving them well. So this is the presentation that I deliver to doctors. It's well received. You might have a presentation that's like this that you can deliver to doctors. What I will say is that if you like this, if you think that doctors might be interested in a webinar like this, I am available to deliver this. I've got a whole course about how you can deliver a webinar like this so doctors actually sign up, show up and step up to your call to action afterwards. So I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this presentation or comments that you might have about this. Are there other financial mistakes that you see your doctor clients making as they try to translate their high incomes into wealth? Roy, thank you so much for your generous questions. You absolutely may share the 9 Money Mistakes PDF with your fellow Rotarians that are doctors. If you want to step it up to another level, just know that you actually do have the option of creating a custom version of this book in which you actually write a foreword and an afterword. So your name would go on the cover. The afterword would be your call to action. You don't necessarily need to do that. You know, if you want the value to be conferred back to you, what you can do is go to Vistaprint and just create a custom bookmark. So, you know, the 9 money mistakes, the picture of that is on the front, and then maybe your picture and your contact information is on the other side of the bookmark. I also will suggest to you that if you really want to reach doctors that you're networking with, Rotarians, what you might want to do is buy physical copies of the book. And you know, if you want to buy in bulk, you're welcome to purchase from me, and I'll just pass along my own author's costs for you. Does most of this apply to Canadian doctors as well? Thank you for asking that question, Tracy. The answer is absolutely yes. So the thing that separates doctors from business owners is their relationship with money and the metrics by which doctors measure success. So you as a business person, you know, when I'm working with financial advisors, in the end, I want to help them be more profitable because profit is the metric by which you measure success. For doctors, service is the metric by which they measure success. And what that means is that, you know, we just don't like talking about money. We're not very prudent about thinking about money. And that's with doctors all around the world. So absolutely, absolutely, these general ideas apply. Now, your tax law is different than the tax law in the US, but still the principle of legally and ethically doing what you can to go with the momentum of the tax code to harvest tax savings, that would be important. But every other point sort of perfectly matches with you. Drew asks, where could we go about negotiating contracts? Great question, Drew. What I would suggest is that you get somebody with contract law as a member of your dream team. So ideally, you have a network of people who can help doctors with any of these things. And negotiating contracts is key. So if you're speaking with doctors, it would be great to say, hey, look, I work with a contract lawyer. He understands doctors. She works with doctors all the time. And so you might want to just check in your, you know, in your own circles. You can always, you know, do research like, you know, Googling contract negotiation for doctors and then put your city in and then see who pops up. But a great contract lawyer, I think that that is really a must-have for doctors. And also, delivering webinars is a really great way of getting doctors engaged. You know, educational marketing really works. And so you might even be able to find a contract lawyer who would be willing to give a great presentation for your doctors. So, you know, consider doing that. You want to make sure that they're a good speaker, that they're entertaining. But how to negotiate? Man, that is huge. I mean, doctors need to not only negotiate contracts, but they need to negotiate with their patients to get their patients to take medication. You need to negotiate with your kids to actually practice the piano. So negotiation is a great thing to do. And there's also some great books that you can pass along to your doctors. My personal favorite is Never Split the Difference. If anyone else has any great books that they like about negotiation, please feel welcome to include that. All right, anything else here? All right, well, I want to thank you for your time. I hope that you found value here. If you've got any questions, please feel welcome to reach out to me. If you go to my website, Targeting Doctors, soon to be engagingdoctors.com, if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you will find a click here to set up a call with me. You're welcome to reach out to me by email or setting up a consultation, and you will get a replay link tomorrow so that you'll be able to go back and review anything that you'd like to catch up on. So thanks again, and stay connected. Bye-bye.